Well, we're going to start our painting of the scene of Notre Dame. Here's the image source, looking towards Notre Dame, seeing some government buildings on the left, cars on the street, green foliage, cloudy day. It just rained in the morning, so we're going to do a rain scene out of this. Uh, we've gone through the drawing, set up the drawing. Now the first thing to do is the sky. In this case, the sky that we're painting is very simple. In other words, we're using a single color, a warm gray, and we're creating a pattern of white spaces which suggest clouds or openings in the clouds. And that should be done as, easily and quickly as possible without much adjustment. One good working thought is to make your strokes counter the buildings and the verticals of the buildings. Once the sky is finished, we can move right into the buildings, and I think it's a good working thought to think of connecting these buildings all as sort of as one unit. We drew them as simple blocky shapes, and we're going to paint them that way too without much nuance. I will be adding a little darker tone towards the top of the buildings, and as the buildings come down towards the street, adding a little more water so that they change the tonality from a darker top to a lighter through the center. This gives a feeling of light reflecting back up into the buildings. It's much more attractive than just painting the buildings one single flat tone. We are using the same gray throughout, which is a mixture of neutral tint and yellow ochre. A lot of water. We want to keep it fairly light in the background and connect everything. You notice that I'm connecting the right side with the left side with the same gray, so that these buildings that form the background and on the right side part of the foreground, they feel like they're made of the same material, and they feel a certain strength because they're connected. This area that I'm working on now is representing the tops of cars, an awning that's on the far side of the street where vendors sell prints and artwork. Now I'm moving over to the left-sided building, which has this beautiful mansard roof on the top. I'm using the same colors, yellow ochre, neutral tint, but going a little stronger in the roof, and then as I come down, you'll notice I'm just adding some water, and I get a nice feeling of light bounce into the resulting dried wash. So you can feel, there's already sort of a strength in the connection of these buildings. They're pretty simple at this point. In other words, we don't see much in terms of windows, not even much in terms of ornamentation. We're saving that for later when we can go back and work with the dry brush. These strokes that I'm using now are a darker version of the same gray and representing foliage, the foliage that moves in front and throughout the scene. This foliage also serves as a connector. In other words, it's joined to the buildings. Even though it comes in front of the buildings, it's joining them to the right side and to the left side. Okay, next we're going to finish up some of the details here in the street part. Now we're adding the actual street. The street is made up of a little different gray, the same neutral tint, but with a little bit of ultramarine blue. You're not going to notice much difference as it's going on wet, but as it dries, you'll notice that the color is definitely cooler. So this is how I'm creating the crosswalk. I start above with a light gray, and then I go below it with a similar gray, just a little darker, and then place those hash marks that create the sidewalk. And as I bring this wash down, look how dark it's getting. I'm creating a graded wash, something that we've been doing for weeks now, meaning as it gets darker towards the bottom, I'm adding thicker pigment, more of that black and blue, and giving it a feeling of depth by doing that. Right now, adding some of those reflections. I'm going to have a building here, so I know where the reflection is going to go. I'm painting it now because the street is still wet and gives me soft edges. We can also paint these dry, or I should say wet the paper after it's dried and add the reflections, but I'm doing it now out of inspiration. Here's the front side of that car, away from the light so it's a little darker, and be adding some more details before we move eventually to the right and finish that building. Then we'll be adding more and more details into the next stage of the painting. It's important to note that these grays are really helping to connect the shapes, and I'm counting on the left whites.